So today we're going to talk about 1984 by the English writer George Orwell. 1984 was first published in 1949, and it is perhaps the most famous dystopian novel ever written. But before I go into the novel itself, I'd like to talk about its author, George Orwell, what he went through in life, his ideology, etc. Because I think it would help us understand 1984 better, but also because Orwell led a fascinating life. So George Orwell's real name was Eric Arthur Blair, but I am going to refer to him as George Orwell in this video to avoid any confusion. He was born in British India in 1903, but grew up in England. The Blairs were a lower upper middle class family, according to Orwell's own description. George Orwell attended the famous elite school Eton, but in 1922 he returned to British India, where he worked as a policeman in Burma, which was then a province of British India. So we're still in the time of the British Empire. Apparently he felt as a bit of an outsider there, which is understandable, and in 1927 he decided to quit the Indian Imperial Police to become a writer and live in England again. After some time in London, Orwell moved to Paris, where he lived for a couple of years before moving back to England once again. Orwell's first book, Down and Out in Paris and London, is about his experiences in those early years in London and Paris. Now, George Orwell became a professional writer. Apart from fiction, he also wrote essays and worked as a journalist. Orwell writes 1984 after World War II, and that context is paramount in understanding the dystopic world he created in the novel. Orwell was only a child during World War I, but he had fought against the Spanish fascists in the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, so before World War II. And his experiences in Spain are the substance of one of his best books, Homage to Catalonia. Now, ideologically, we must place George Orwell in the political left. And this is important to highlight because he was critical with apparent left-wing regimes, not only in 1984, but also in Animal Farm. Orwell is firmly anti-fascist, but he's also critical with Stalin's regime. What is interesting, I think, is that right-wingers like to hold 1984 and Animal Farm up as critiques of the political left, but I think that kind of co-option by the right misses the point. And what Orwell was criticizing were totalitarian regimes. Of course, the largest totalitarian regime after World War II was the USSR, the Soviet Union. It is easy to draw a parallel between Stalin's Soviet Union and the dystopia Orwell thought up in 1984, but there are also parallels between Orwell's dystopia and Nazi Germany, for example. So George Orwell died in 1950, so Animal Farm, which was published in 1945, and 1984, which was published in 1949, were his last two books. Okay. So let's go into 1984 now. So this novel is one of the most important books of the 20th century. I'm going to try to explain why without spoiling the novel. And of course, if you watch my reviews, you know that I never spoil the plot. But let me just set up 1984 for you so we can talk about it. So 1984 is not a random number, first of all. It is the year in which the narrative takes place. Because the novel was published in 1949, we are dealing with a futuristic dystopia. Orwell imagines what the world could be like not that far into the future, but only a few decades later. And he imagines a dystopian world, a world that is somber and where there is a totalitarian regime based on Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia, but also with certain technological advances that Orwell projects into the future. But why 1984? Why that particular year? There is a theory according to which, because Orwell finished the novel in 1948, he would have simply swapped the last two numbers. So 48, 48 to 84, 48. So 1948, thus 1984. I don't know if that is true. On the one hand, it seems silly, but who knows? Anyway, the world in 1984 is completely different to the world Orwell lived in. He's not recreating the USSR or anything like that in his novel. So the world in 1984 is controlled by three competing totalitarian regimes. Oceania, which is where the novel takes place, has its main territories in the Western Hemisphere, Britain, Ireland, Australasia, Polynesia, and Southern Africa. Then there's Eurasia, whose main territories are continental Europe and Russia. And finally, there's Eastasia, whose main territories are China, Japan, Korea, and what was then Indochina, now we would say mainland Southeast Asia. So the world is constantly at war. The three superpowers are always at war with each other. Oceania is controlled by a party called INSOC, which stands for English Socialism. Now, Big Brother is both the character and symbol that ostensibly rules over Oceania. We don't know if Big Brother is or was at any time a person, or whether he is just a symbol that personifies that regime. What we do know is that there is a cult of personality around Big Brother. It is impossible to escape the face of Big Brother, no matter where you go in Oceania. Big Brother's face is everywhere, looking directly at you, watching you. The regime also uses constant propaganda. Each home has a TV screen. In the novel they're called telescreens, so that the state can broadcast its propaganda into every home. But those screens have a double function, because while they show the state programs, they also record the people watching. The idea, again, is that Big Brother is watching you, even when you are at home and you think you are alone. Now, the government is able to exercise double control on the people. On the one hand, by feeding them with propaganda about the war and other issues that they seemed important, while also controlling the citizens' every movement, even when they think they are alone at home. Now, in 1984, the government watches the people. So everyone lives under constant surveillance by the government, which, by the way, hasn't been democratically elected. And I do wonder what Orwell would have made of the internet and social media, which are also ruled by people that no one has elected democratically. I think that one of the reasons that 1984 continues to be so widely read is the increasing concern of surveillance by governments and also by corporations so far in the 21st century. But going back to the novel, okay, there is a mass repression, often violent repression. Any attempt at independent thought or individuality is persecuted by the so-called thought police, who enforce punishments against what they call thought crime. Now, Oceania, as I said, is a one-party superstate in which political dissidence is not only not tolerated, but also severely punished, often by means of physical torture, as we see in the book. The state is also negationist. I know I'm using a lot of words that unfortunately continue to be relevant to this day. So the state is negationist in that it rewrites history. Literally, the state has people whose job it is to rewrite history. And one of them is Winston Smith, the main character of the novel. Now, society in 1984 is hierarchical, so let's see what its structure is and how Winston fits into it. So there are those with close links to the party who we could call the elite, then people who are not that closely linked to the party. This is the class of people to which Winston belongs. And finally, at the bottom of society are the masses. Well, there are 4 ministers in Oceania, each of them with an ironic name. There's the Ministry of Peace, in charge of war, the Ministry of Plenty, in charge of rationing food and other goods, the Ministry of Truth, which is in charge of education, entertainment, news, and the arts, and which is the main instrument for propaganda and spreading negationism. And the Ministry of Love, finally, which is the one in charge of dissidents, whether real or imagined. The police depend on the Ministry of Love. So Winston Smith works for the Ministry of Truth, specifically the Records Department. Oceania is in constant war, but its enemies change from time to time, and the pronouncements made by Big Brother are also ever-changing and contradictory. So people like Winston work at constantly changing historical records in all newspapers and publications to reflect the current pronouncements by Big Brother and the current state of the war. So in doing so, the state is able to change the perception not just of the present but also of the past, and quite literally, as I said earlier, rewrite history. Now, the Ministry of Truth is in charge of telling lies by falsifying written records. The end goal of this ministry and the other three is that all citizens lose their individuality and their capacity for independent thought and become increasingly more easily controllable by the state. So the state indoctrinates its citizens through doublethink as well. So what is doublethink? Doublethink is being expected to accept something that is false as true, or accept two mutually contradictory beliefs as correct simultaneously. The point of doublethink is to question an individual's capacity for independent thought. Now, another important concept in the novel is Newspeak. Newspeak is the language of Oceania, and it is so controlled. It has such simplified grammar and limited vocabulary as to hinder complex thinking. So the point, once again, is to control people, erase any individual traits they may have, and stop any dissident thoughts from forming in people's heads. Now, the party wants to control people's thoughts. That's why they have the thought police that I mentioned earlier. And that's why also they promote things like doublethink and Newspeak. Now, all these ideas, all these concepts that I have discussed are inserted in a plot. 1984 is a novel with a clear plot. I'm just not going to talk about it because A, I don't want to spoil it for anybody who reads for plot and hasn't read the novel yet, and B, because I think that talking about a novel's plot in a book review is boring and hardly tells us anything about what the book is really about. But 1984 has a good plot, okay? Nothing incredibly original. It even has the obligatory straight romance involving Winston and another character. Anyway, I think 1984 is one of those books that everyone must read. If nothing else, because of the concepts that Orwell made up, like Big Brother and others, because they have made their way into everyday speak. Now, if you read this novel, you will learn the origin of a lot of references that journalists and politicians make even today. Now, one thing, I would just ask you not to take 1984 too seriously. There seems to be a generation of right-wing politicians and sympathizers right now who sometimes sound like the only book they've ever read is 1984 and perhaps Animal Farm. One or the other, or maybe both. Don't be like them. Don't be like them. But of course, this is just my opinion. Now, I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. If you are new to my channel, welcome. My name is Juan, and I post a new book review every Saturday. The best way not to miss any of my reviews would be for you to subscribe and turn on the notifications bell. So this is all from me for now. I hope that you are all doing very well, and hope to see you again very soon for another book review. Bye for now.